I remember the first time they came in 3 years ago, this thing just stole the show, and she's still very bright. And I see my wife is doing a good job in keeping this thing polished and making sure you're doing a good job too. I showed her the plane when it was here the other day, and I told her the joke I've been making about her being in charge of keeping it shiny, and she slapped me. But anyway.
Thanks for having us back.
Oh, we're glad to have you back. Let's talk about that. I want to talk about how this bird was found. Frank Mazzolini was the one that really, he's the guy that brought this bird back, started to bring this bird back to life.
Tony Mazzolini was from Cleveland, Ohio, and he flew electronic countermeasure missions in B-25s during the Korean War, but in the United States. And he kept crossing paths with the B-29 squadron called the Snow White Squadron in upstate New York. That squadron had 9 B-29s. They were named after all 9 characters from the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it kind of got an interest in him with the B-29. So later, after he was out of the Air Force and working for the airlines, he wanted to find one and restore. Little did he know he would end up with finding Doc the Dwarf from that squadron. It was located in China Lake Naval Air Station in 1988, where the Navy was using it for missile testing and target practice. Fortunately, they missed. And so in '98, he traded them a B-25 for their museum and acquired Doc and brought it to Wichita on 7 flatbed semis in the year 2000. And we spent the next 16 years restoring it to flight status. So this is our 3rd year on the air show circuit. The airplane just loves to fly. He just flies fantastically. So it's a really great airplane to fly.
I was just asking, where are the photos of Tony rope towing it out of the desert, and apparently it's not here. You go on the website, just go on to Google it or whatever, B-29 Doc, and look at the pictures of Tony. He's literally got a rope over his shoulder. Well, you tell him about it, Frank. You do better than I do.
He, as they were taking him out in the desert, he saw the airplane from about a mile or 2 away, and before the truck was even stopped, he jumped out and he ran up to it, and he threw a rope around the nose gear, and the tires were gone and flat. He leaned up against this rope. He was ready to drag it out of the desert himself. So.
And they got a DVD here that's got the whole thing on it. This is a fantastic, get it. It's worth the price. It's got the history of it, Tony finding the bird and so on. Let's talk about what he had to go through to get that bird, custody, if I can use that term, custody of Doc.
Now, the Navy would not sell him a B-29. Their rules didn't allow that. But they realized that they did not have a B-25, which was the Mitchell bomber that flew off the Hornet and made the first attack against Tokyo in the spring of '42. They realized they didn't have one of those in their museum. So they made him a deal that said, if you can bring us a B-25 ready to put in our museum, we'll trade you for a B-29. So 11 years later, in '98, he brought them a B-25, and he said, here's your B-25, where's my B-29? So he got Doc at that point. It took him almost a week to move it 30 miles to Inyokern. You can blow up turtles in the desert, but you can't let the shadow of a B-29 pass over the habitat of the desert sand turtle. So go figure. So it took him quite a while to get it out of the desert.
There's a story running around, Josh was telling us about it, that when the Navy said, we want a B-25, they kind of thought, yeah, it ain't never going to happen. We're never going to see that guy again. We could go back to doing our normal work. Is that correct?
That's pretty much it, yeah. And then he
shows up.
Yeah, he fooled them. Said, here's your airplane, where's mine?
And it still wasn't over as far as getting it.
Yeah, like I say, they had to deal with environmentalists, and you can't mess up the dirt in the desert. And it was a real challenge. It took him, I think, almost a year to figure out the logistics just to drag it out of the desert.
And tow trucks were not available. That's why Tony used the tow rope over the shoulder to get it out of there. Getting it from the desert to Wichita, which was its birthplace, that was a journey unto its own also.
Yeah, Boeing came out and did an inspection of the airplane and said it's in pretty good shape, but it did have some corrosion that they were going to have to work on that made it unflyable. So Tony was kind of disillusioned. What do I do? I've got this airplane, I can't fly now. But he was put in touch with Jeff Turner, who was the president of Boeing Wichita. And Jeff said, if you can get the airplane to Wichita, we'll help you restore it. So they disassembled the airplane into some smaller segments that they could ship on by truck, and they ended up bringing it back to Wichita in the summer of 2000 on 7 flatbed semis. And then we ended up with an airplane puzzle in the hangar floor and had to figure out how to put it back together.
And buying and finding B-29 parts, you just don't go to your local auto zone to get those, do you?
No, it's not something that's stocked on eBay.
And Boeing didn't have that many parts laying around either.
Very few parts are available. They acquired everything they could. In our case, we had a bad spar, and so Boeing actually converted the line drawings from 1944 to CAD. Alcoa cast a new block of aluminum for us, and they machined out a new spar for us. So that allowed Doc to get back in the air. It wouldn't have happened any place other than Wichita, Kansas. So we're very proud as the air capital, but we're very proud and honored to be able to put this fine airplane back into the sky.
A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into this thing. People like you, Donnie, and the rest of the crew. They're with a short crew here this week, and they've been working their tail off to have this bird ready both for here and when she was up in Appleton for a couple days. Let's talk about what it's taking to keep Doc in the air. This is not a cheap airplane. You don't just fill her up with your $50 worth of gas every week and say, yeah, we're set to go. Talk about the expenses.
We burn about 2 gallons per mile, so that's about $3,000 of fuel per hour just to operate the airplane. That doesn't include engine reserves and wear and tear on tires and everything else that we have. So hourly operating costs are probably $8,000 to $10,000. So it takes a lot to keep the airplane flying. Our intent is to be able to do this for 50 years or more, long after we're gone. So we are all thankful for your support and cockpit tours and ride flights, and we're again thankful for all the support you guys provide.
And they are doing cockpit tours here, and then they got the, I'll call it the souvenir stand over here that you can get. And Rosie's even here today.
That's right.
Rosie the Rivers. Stand up, Rosie.
This is Connie. She's our Connie the Riveter. She was riveting airplanes in B-29s in 1944. So she actually built Doc in the beginning, and she's back helping us keep Doc flying now.
And she's available for photos. There's no charge, but she's a wonderful. She's been here a couple of years, and she's just a lovely lady. We were lucky last year. One of the pilots that flew this thing in the Second World War was here, and you should have seen those two together. It was fun. It was like Christmas here on the ramp.
It was
just fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get going with my favorite part about the B-29 with Donnie. Donnie O'Brider's the flight, well, they're both flight engineers, but Donnie's in charge of making sure this baby runs. And let's go back to the engines on the original B-29s and how they created smog alerts.
Well, it was more than smog alerts. It was fires. It was loss of life. We lost more men to those engine problems than we did to combat. And so when you go back in time and you look at the leap in technology that this airframe brought to the world, they needed an engine that could get it up into the air and to do that. And so as the airframe along with the engine were both being designed, developed, and was put into production before they were ever even tested. And so there were countless problems with these, with the original engines on the airplane. Oiling problems, overheating problems, fires. Probably most of the aircrew you talk to from the time, very rarely did they ever have all 4 engines working when they got home with this machine. And so now as we go forward in time, back with the Commemorative Air Force's B-29 Phoebe, we were still operating the original engines. And in 2006, we had actually, after just an overhaul, 6 hours on the engine, it exploded. and that was it. We were out of engines for B-29. Now, after the war, they had taken and they had redesigned this massive 3350, turned it into an extremely reliable engine. The problem is they made so many changes to it that it doesn't fit our propeller, it doesn't fit in the nacelle, and there's no way to put that on this airplane without taking away from the original appearance of the machine. And so what we came up with is, at the time, kind of like working with Legos, we took the back end of the Skyraider engine that actually holds up to the wing, the spar into the mouth, and we took the front end of the AC-119 engine. It has close to the same gearing for the propeller, and it fits inside the engine. And so by putting those two pieces together, changing the pitch on the propellers, we're able to actually bring some of that reliability into dock as well as speed.
These engines, when you fire them up, they still smoke a little bit, but not like the original. When you started, when Fifi was here, before she got her new engines, Fifi's the only other 29 flying, by the way, and she's not here this week, unfortunately, but talk about the difference in smoke from, like I said, it created a smog alert. Those things, that really fired up.
It was bad, and it wasn't just operating the engine. When we would go out and we would pre-flight the original fuel-injected engines, it took 3 to 4 hours to pre-flight those airplanes. You'd have to pressurize the fuel system. There were hat seals that leaked. It was a chore, and I don't ever remember in all my years with Fifi us making a stop or a move somewhere. We weren't changing a cylinder. I couldn't tell how many times we came in on the 3 propellers spinning.
Constant maintenance.
Yeah, it was a huge plume of smoke. And each engine on this airplane actually has an 85-gallon oil tank. And with those old engines, you definitely need them. Because you can figure 5 to 10 gallons an hour, which would leak or burn.
And getting the new engine made was quite the effort.
Oh,
again, you don't go down to AutoZone and get a new engine or call Ford Motor Company and say, hey, have you got a spare?
No, thankfully Anderson, the engine builder for this, when we talked with him about it after he got done with the what? and started putting this onto paper and started developing it, started making the measurements. Kermit Weeks had loaned us one of his nacelles off of his B-29, so we could do mock-ups, we could stage it, we had to fabricate exhaust, we had to run wiring. There was a lot that went into this beyond just building the engine. And then to go to the FAA, and I can't thank those guys enough, to walk in there and trying to do the Olympics paperwork and say, we just took 2 type certified engines, took them apart, put random pieces together that are not type certified prop on. We're going to put it on an experimental airplane and fly it. Are you okay with that?
There was a lot of ingenuity, machining. Is that a fair way to put it?
It was a lot of ingenuity, a lot of creativity, a lot of very talented people came together to do this. And again, everything even on the bureaucracy side of trying to get it reliable, get it tested, and put it into the air in a safe, reliable manner. It took 4 years to go through that process.
I gotta believe along the way, there were days where you just took your arms, you threw them up in the air and said, we're never going to get this thing off the ground.
There were a lot of frustrating days throughout this, a lot of long nights. None of us gave up, and I don't know if we're just.
I don't mean to infer giving up.
Because
yeah, but
we're stubborn, or we just don't know any better. But we did have. I couldn't tell you how many people came through to visit Fifi in the museum when we were starting this process, and told us, "You're never going to get this done."
Yeah, but they did, and there she is. When you're, I'm going to make a pitch right now. It's going to sound like a telethon, but when you go over to the souvenir stand and whatever you can help out, the Warbird's motto is keep them flying, and that's the whole purpose of this thing.
Everything over there, all the souvenirs, every single penny in the cockpit goes directly back in the dock. What's unique about this dock organization is there are no paid staff. We are all volunteers. Frank retired early, I think it's safe to go on the road and to support dock. I work for the Air Force when I'm not here, and all my vacation time goes into dock, and it couldn't be for a better cause. And just some of the routine things that you put into normal day life, like to change the oil in your car, no big deal, right? When we change the oil in this, it's $10,000 just to change the oil.
Just to change the oil.
And again, it's all of you people supporting the aircraft, taking rides, buying merchandise. the donation. That's what keeps this in the air. So thank you all.
You're talking about changing the oil. The tires, you can't go down to your local Goodyear dealer and say, hey, have you got a, what do you call it, for my B29? Where do you get those?
So the tires, the main landing gear tires will cost you about $5,000 a piece. There's still some floating around. Thankfully, Dunlop every couple of years had been making runs of those tires because they're the same tire for a B-24, B-17. The Neptune fire bombers still use them. So they're around, but they're not cheap. The nose tires for this airplane are almost on the verge of being priceless. They're just not available. They're the same main landing gears of tires of P-38 main gear, same tire as the nose tire on an A-26. Nobody uses them. So when you do find them, if you can find them, they actually cost more than the main landing gear tires do.
How long do they last? How many good landings and takeoffs are they good for?
It really depends on our pilot.
Sorry, say again?
It depends on our pilot.
I got it. Well, you don't want me up there, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and again, we've been through training processes, rough environments where you might get 5 to 6 landings out of the tire. Hopefully Mark didn't hear that. And other times where we've got tires on here, a couple of the main tires have been on for 2 years.
$5,000 a tire.
Yep.
Sure. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask of either one of our gentlemen here? Raise your hand and I'll come out to you. All right, let's talk about, that was easy, yeah, these guys are a good crowd. Let's talk about the big thing back down in Wichita, which you built. It was a multi-million-dollar project to get a hangar for Doc to hang out in when she's not in the air.
Our board of directors had a vision that was far greater than us as volunteers, and they put together a plan and completed that plan. We have a fantastic $6.5 million hangar education center in Wichita. So we're open to the public when the airplane is there. You can come by and get tours of the airplane. And upstairs in our education center, we've got all the historical pieces that we don't have with the airplane. So we've got full segments of the radio operator, navigator segments with all the original equipment they had back then. We've got bomb sights, gun sights, we've got a turret, we've got a little bit of everything. We've got a tunnel so that kids and adults who want to crawl through the tunnel on a B-29, we've got one of those up there. We've got some great displays. We've got one honoring Rosie the Riveter, one with Charles Chauncey and the pilots who flew these airplanes back in the war. It's just a fantastic facility, and it gives us a great home to come back to and maintain the airplane. People can watch us do that, and so it's really, we're very thankful that we have this fantastic facility.
You just opened that hangar this year, as I remember, right?
That's right, yeah. It's brand new, and we've just been in it since this winter, so we welcome everybody. If you're in Wichita, Kansas, we're right there at Eisenhower National Airport. Come on by.
Appreciate it. Donnie, Frank, so good to have you guys and the rest of the crew of the 29 year. It's always a joy to see it. And I'll have Mary come out before you guys pull out Sunday, make sure she's airworthy from a shiny standpoint. All right. Thank you guys, and thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you.